I'm Andrew Willett for A Pro Basketball Show. Follow and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, as well as following on social media at APBShow on Twitter and Instagram. Be sure to follow me as well at TheACWillett22. Thank you so much for tuning in, and without further ado, hello and welcome to A Pro Basketball Show. I am so excited to talk to our guest today as we're going to go through some of the recent news in the WNBA, as well as get into some of the salary cap here with the W. Talked a few different topics, but again, so excited to be welcomed. He is the man behind WNBA Alien, and currently seen at Her Hoop Stats and various other portals, as he puts it, over the years. But that is Richard Cohen. Richard, thank you so much for taking the time. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, it's good to be here.
So, I mean, we're at this point in the WNBA season. We've talked off air a little bit. You've made some trips, but what have you been up to recently in the WNBA world? I know you just posted a great article. Yeah, tell the world, what have you been up to?
Yeah, well, this week was covering just everything that's happened in the last week, which has been, Wilson signing an extension, James Wade leaving, second coaching change already this season, which is unusual in this league to have two in the first month and a half of the season. We had a trade, which is even more unusual in this league. Lots of stuff to write about this week, and still getting back into things after missing a few games while I was in Ljubljana for Eurobasket. But yeah, otherwise just getting back into the season.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, it must have been really cool to go over to Eurobasket. I'm happy to have you back here, though. I was looking forward to getting you on the show and to kind of jump into a little bit of nerd territory where I am just like all about a lot of the stuff. I don't know much about it, so we're gonna get into it. You're gonna be my guide here through the CBA, the salary cap, all of that. But for starters, tell the viewers, I guess, what is the CBA, the Collective Bargaining Agreement, and what is its purpose?
Well, it's basically just the overarching agreement that sets the rules and the parameters for everything for the league. In theory, it's between the league and the players, but it also governs all the rules for the teams and everything else as well. So, yeah, it's what sets all the rules. I think on one level, its primary element is fairness, in that it tries to keep the teams as even as it can, which is something that a lot of US sports have over a lot of European leagues, where it's more, Manchester United is run like a business, like any other business, whereas the Chicago Bulls are one small part of the NBA, which is one giant business in and of itself. So the CBA kind of creates that arena where you sort of set rules for all of the teams and try and keep them even, which US sports has that a lot of European leagues don't.
That's really interesting to touch on the differences from, I guess, overseas from where I'm at and here in the U.S. When you talk about, I guess, just setting the rules, what I think really becomes most interesting to me is kind of the team building aspects of what teams are allowed to do under these rules in order to build the best possible team. I think a lot of basketball fans, especially, I guess I know a lot of NBA fans who love that team building aspect. But so I guess that's my next question: is what is the salary cap, and for the WNBA specifically? It's a little bit different than the NBA, where you see teams like the Phoenix Suns just shooting past any sort of salary cap, or how it has become famously known as the second apron. I guess if you could kind of go into detail on what that is for the WNBA.
Well, yeah, I did just have to actually look up the exact number because it's not quite imprinted on my brain. It is at some points in the year, but not at the moment. The salary cap this year is $1,420,500, just to set the number on it. The reason WNBA teams can't go skyrocketing past it like NBA teams do is because it's much closer to being a hard cap than the NBA number is. There aren't bird rights. There aren't all of the exceptions that the NBA has, which allow teams to go over what the number is, and then you have an apron and a second apron, all of that stuff. The WNBA is much simplified, which is an element of you see in various points in the CBA for the WNBA. It's similar to what the NBA has, but is a simplified variant of it in certain places, basically. And yeah, apart from hardship exceptions, which are now quite common around the league because everyone's made use of them, and obviously the pregnancy exception rules that have come in this year as well. Apart from those, you basically can't go over the cap. So many teams are using it that half the teams in the league are over the cap, but it's in theory a hard number that you can't go past. So that's why you see so many players taking a discount in order to fit their teammates in and keep their team as competitive as possible, because that's the only way you can fit all of those players under the cap, because you can't go over it.
That was a little sneak peek into a topic that we are about to get into with Asia Wilson. But before that, another sneak peek with you mentioned a trade has happened this week, which doesn't happen very often. Why is that so uncommon in the WNBA?
Well, you have to, at the completion of any given trade, both teams have to be under the cap. So because so many teams are now over the cap due to using hardship exceptions, using the pregnancy exceptions, they can't get under anymore because you are required to have at least 11 players, or it's 11 or 12 under the rules. So because you're required to have at least 11, you can't reduce the roster to 7 players to fit everything in. So it's hard to complete a deal and have both teams finish it with a number that's under the salary cap. And Washington were $118 under when they finished the deal that happened this week. And yeah, if they kept one of their hardship players one day longer, it wouldn't have been possible.
That is still bonkers to think about, especially with the trade as I don't know what the phrase in fascinating, interesting, mind-boggling as this trade kind of seemed to be at the end of the day. We'll get into that a little bit more. I have a few more kind of basic questions, but the Supermax and the Max, why is there a maximum salary ahead of the already maximum salary?
Well, that again is a rule, or at least the NBA has variants of the same rule as well. It's theoretically intended to help teams keep their own players, because the primary way you can get the Supermax is to re-sign with your existing team. So the fact that existing team can offer $30,000-$40,000 more than any other team could to a free agent is supposed to be an encouragement to stay with your existing team. So if you're a small market team whose their contract's just run out, in theory that extra bit is supposed to help you keep them rather than have them walk away to another team.
Which makes the recent news of the signing all the more interesting, as I'm sure we will touch on. But you mentioned in your article a little bit, where a new CBA coming up here in the next couple of years, I believe. Do you expect any changes from that?
Yeah, I mean, it will be at the end of the 2025 season is likely when we'll be looking for a new one. In theory, the current one runs 2 years beyond that, but there's always an opt-out that either side can exercise, and one side or the other is always unhappy. So someone's always going to exercise it. So the opt-out date is the realistic ending. Yeah, I mean, in terms of what is within the rules that could change, I'm sure they'll look at prioritization again, because it's been such a hot topic for so many of the players. they might look at roster size to sort of force teams to have 12 players, or try and create some kind of injured reserve, or even expand rosters to 13, who knows. But the problem then is you have to pay more players, and once you start asking players, do you want us to put more players on the team and you have less money, the answer sometimes changes. But no, I mean, the main change is going to just be the numbers involved, because at the same time as this CBA is going to end, they're going to be looking for a new broadcast deal. And we've seen the astronomical numbers that MLS signed for their deal with Apple. And MLS's ratings are similar to what the WNBA gets. So that makes people optimistic that the price for the next deal could be enormous. And if it is, then salaries go up. So yeah, that's why I've written a couple of times that I don't expect many players, certainly not many star players, to sign contracts that go beyond 2025, because their agents will be waiting on what that new deal could look like. We saw it last time around as well. There were like 2 players left that had signed a year or 2 beyond when the new collective bargaining agreement was signed. So sort of Sylvia Fowles, I remember, as the main one, who was significantly cheaper than she ought to have been for the last couple of years of that contract, because she signed it under the old deal. And unless they come up with a special rule, you don't get to re-sign a new one until that runs out.
Wow. Okay. Well, and I guess I was kind of asking maybe if we could see some more trades potentially out of the new CBA changes in season, because those are always a little more fun. Do you think?
I mean, if they fix some of the monetary rules, then it becomes more plausible. Yeah, if they did something like take the hardships off the main cap calculations, that would make it a lot easier for everyone to stay under the cap when making deals. But yeah, we'll see. Yeah, it depends. And it's one of those things where you don't necessarily know what kind of atmosphere you're going to create with the rules you put in place until they're in place and the teams start trying to work out how to get around the rules.
Until they're in place and Kevin Durant is now a member of the Warriors.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
But okay, so it all sounds like with most things, it's going to come down to money. We over here on the show, we want to see more players on the rosters. We want to see more teams out there. We want to see more money in the players' pockets. All for all of that. Interesting to see how that shapes up in the next couple of seasons. Anything else we should know about maybe how the finances work, especially when it comes to team building in the W?
Well, I mean, I think what we're mostly going to talk about when it comes to Las Vegas and Wilson is whether people should be taking less money than they're actually worth. It's a question that a lot of people have started getting into and that feel strongly about. You're perfectly within your rights to take whatever sum you want. We've seen Breanna Stewart take significantly less to go to New York because she wanted to play in New York and she wanted to play with a highly competitive roster as well. The question becomes whether there are things going on behind the scenes, like how obviously been alleged in multiple cases with Las Vegas, and whether people are working around the rules. Because ultimately, if they're not, there's nothing to stop people taking less money, and there's nothing wrong with them taking less money. It's a perfectly reasonable choice. But yeah, you wonder what's going on else.
It's all got to come into the same CBA in terms of it's not a fit within the rules. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean we've seen it with the charter flights as well, where everyone would love to be flying everyone charter, but it's very expensive, and the league have decided that that's one of those areas where they're trying to keep things fair, because part of the reason they don't allow it is because then it would be an advantage to the teams with billionaire owners who are perfectly happy to fly their teams on private airlines everywhere over the teams that can't afford to do that.
Well, and I guess we'll jump over here to that beautiful article that you wrote. I mean, great job over at her hoop stats. Don't check out what Richard does. Does some great work. As well, also talked about that podcast that you did with Kevin Pelton. But yeah, to start things out, just going through this article, as we've started to talk about a little bit, but the Aces, they signed an extension with Asia Wilson, the 2 years tacked on at $200,000, which you outline in the article about nearly $90,000 less than what she could have had over that 2 year span.
Yep.
Like you said, they're able to take whatever money they would like. It does come down to what changes. So I guess my question for you around this contract is going to be, why are the Aces better set up right now than they were a week ago?
Well, on a basic level, they've got the MVP under contract for 2 extra years. I mean, anytime you can lock down a superstar for as long as possible, especially at under market value, then, I mean, because that's less than the max. It's not only less than Supermax, it's less than she could have got as a free agent trying to go to another team. It makes her the equal highest paid player next year on the Aces with Kelsey Plum. But yeah, so the Aces are that good. And I mean, we've already seen this season how good they can be with this core. And that entire core is locked up through next season. And now Wilson is in through 2025 as well. So when you get your star under contract, people usually want to play with superstars because they're going to start winning. So maybe Plum and Gray and Young and who knows who else could still be sticking around. I mean, this offseason they got Candace Parker. So we've seen lots of ring chasers in the NBA. Why not the same thing? Who knows who might show up?
Yeah, well, I mean, this team has been so good this season when it comes to their output on the floor, where it has been the 16-1, I believe, and they're very much approaching the most games played before your record all time. I believe is 20-1. Best team in the W, like you said, coming off of the addition of Candace Parker, as well as Alicia Clark, a big-time get.
Yep.
And then they're able to go out just quietly. They don't get the MVP, two-time MVP, locked up for 2 more years. And so I guess my next question, based off of your article, where you talked a little bit about they have those other core players in a Chelsea Gray, Jackie Young, Kelsey Plum, locked up for just next season. Why are they likely to only be locked up through 2025, though?
Again, it's the same collective bargaining agreement issue where the new TV deal should come the year after that. So you don't sign longer than that because the money could change entirely. The max could jump, who knows, $200,000. So if you don't want to be signed for $215,000 a year if the max is then going to be $400,000. So you sign through the end of the previous deal and wait and see what might happen. But obviously that could be unsettling for the team because there's a chance that your entire roster, practically, certainly every meaningful player, could be becoming an unrestricted free agent at the exact same time. And then you never know what's going to happen, basically. The whole offseason could be a mess because you don't know who's going to leave, who's going to stay.
And that gets interesting because including this season, that's 3 years left under the CBA before they would seemingly have no players under contract, all hitting free agency. And so it'll be interesting to see how this Aces squad finishes up this season and how they look in the next couple of years, especially with those contracts. But clearly they're in great shape after the dominating win over the New York Liberty just a little bit ago. To the next piece of news in your article, the Queen Edbo deal over for Amanda Zowie B between the Indiana Fever and the Washington Mystics. I was kind of flabbergasted by this move. And really from the standpoint, my instant reaction was for the Indiana Fever because I'm pretty high. I'm based in Indiana. I'm pretty high on what Queen Edbo can be at the end of the day. So I'll lead this one off to you. Why did Indiana do this move?
Well, I mean, that was pretty much the basis of the section on it in the article today, trying to come up with a reason why they would have. I think there's a good chance that Egbo wasn't happy with how this season had gone. I mean, obviously they've added Aaliyah Boston in, and then Egbo's minutes have plummeted. There's a good chance she wanted to play more and went and asked to do that. But she's still an asset, and you still have to treat her as an asset. The WNBA does have more of a history and a practice of sort of acceding to requests from players if players want to be traded, and even if they want to be traded to a specific place, it does usually happen eventually. Teams usually accommodate those requests, but you have to think Indiana should have gotten more. Basically, maybe they think Zoe B could be a good fit. She likes to shoot from outside more than Egbo does, so she can try and provide a bit more range. But especially because Egbo's significantly younger, she's cheaper, she's under contract for the next 2 years. If you want her to be, the fourth year's a team option. Zoe B will be a free agent at the end of the year, regardless of how well it goes with her in Indiana. So. Yeah, it didn't make a lot of sense to me unless there's something going on behind the scenes that we didn't know about. At the very minimum, Egbo requesting to go somewhere.
That's a fair point. And in terms of, because I think that's where my brain went to as soon as I was like, why would they do that? Maybe Twin Edbo wanted a little bit more time. And on the show, I mean, I had been saying maybe Twin Edbo plays a little bit with Melissa Smith and Aaliyah Boston, and we didn't see much of that at all, Aaliyah or Tween out there on the court together. But in terms of the fit with Washington, let's start right there because you mentioned it off the bat. But I think $118 left over in salary cap room for Washington. How did this trade somehow go through?
Yeah, I mean they did the math. Someone in Washington was keeping track of the numbers and knew full well that was the last day they could keep their hardship players for and still get a deal like this done. I imagine they're the ones that approached Indiana about the deal rather than the other way around. Although you never know, if Egbo had asked out, then maybe it went the other way. But so it got done because they released their two hardship players, which cuts a huge amount off the cap, and then. Because Egbo is earning slightly less than Zoe B, because Zoe B's on the veteran minimum and Egbo's on the rookie scale contract, they essentially save money. So they stepped down about $6,700 going from Zoe B to Egbo, and that moved them under the cap, which made the deal legal.
And how do you like the fit, especially knowing the recent news of Shatira Austin coming down with an injury?
Well, I saw just before we started recording that Elena Deladon has been listed as questionable for their next game. So presumably her ankle injury isn't too bad. So at least it will be only Austin that they're missing rather than both Austin and Deladon like it was for Washington's most recent game. I think Egbo's a decent fit because they won't ask too much of her. They're only going to want her really to rebound and defend, and if you're wide open, finish a layup. That's what they need you to do when you're playing off someone like Deladon, who draws a lot of attention and is going to create a lot of space. They got good perimeter players as well, obviously, especially defensively. And I don't think they'll ask Egbo to do too much. And they got Tiana Hawkins having quite a good season as well, so they won't even need Egbo to play too many minutes necessarily. Although it'll help if she can.
Yeah, and we just finished recording a kind of a Mystics in season breakdown, and then a week after that we get the Egbo trade news. Again, I'm a big fan of her ceiling and just what she provides as a player. I think will fit really well into that Shatira Austin void, and I'm interested to see how her role comes along as she as Shakira Austin comes back, hopefully sooner rather than later. On to the next piece here, where you touched on James Wade, as he has gone stepping down. Chicago released their statement today, I believe, stepping down as the general manager and head coach of the Chicago Sky, and going and becoming an assistant coach with the Toronto Raptors. At this point in the season, what was your initial reaction to the news that James Wade would no longer be the coach in Chicago?
Well, I was surprised and then I wasn't, because it came out of the blue to a certain extent. No one was expecting him to go anywhere, but at the same time, he's always been an ambitious guy, and it doesn't surprise me that he's looking to other places where he could become a better coach or take on what would be considered a more important role. Obviously, we all love this league, but ultimately, if you're a basketball coach and you don't care whether it's women or men, then the NBA is probably considered the absolute peak. I don't think like Cheryl Reeve is ever going to leave and try and take on an NBA gig. I think she sees where she is as the ceiling. But if you just see it as the game, then the NBA is the next level. So maybe that's where he wants to go and where he wanted to be. For Chicago, I think it's complicated because he leaves them in a difficult situation. This is a much shakier roster than it was a year ago, because this is already half a rebuild, whether he wanted to admit that or not. And with him gone, does Kalia Copper stay at the end of the season? What happens next, basically, is much more up in the air without him controlling things.
Yes, you mentioned kind of the footing that he's left Chicago in, and I think in large part that's a lot of where the move didn't rub me the wrong way. It didn't rub a lot of fans, the right way in terms of how he left. But I don't like where this team coming off an offseason where they lose Courtney Vandersloot, Candace Parker, Azurá Stevens, Emma Miesemann, amongst others, Allie Quigley, of course. Yeah. And so losing all of that talent, and then to go and in the offseason trade really the rights to your Nets 3 first-round picks in 23, 24, 25, and to then get nearly halfway through a season and call it quits. I from an optics standpoint, I'm not a fan of that. It doesn't look.
You can totally understand why the fans might not be happy. Yeah, that a guy would make a move like that and then not be the one to stick around and try and back it up. Basically, he's leaving the next guy to try and handle what the situation he's left them in, rather than handling it himself. Yeah.
And that's tough on the Chicago Sky team, who we see right now are going on a little bit of a run after losing 6 straight games. But I know you pointed out in your article, like, hey, this is a chance that he might not have had in a couple of seasons if Chicago doesn't do as well as they have been. I think that's a very fair point to talk about. I also think, at the same time, like you said, it's very reasonable for fans to not be too happy, because you've got no draft picks, and Talia Topper is a free agent, unrestricted free agent at that next offseason. And so I was kind of going to ask you about that, too. Did you see any Talia Topper sweepstakes, or do you think, even despite the James Wade move, she could stay committed to Chicago?
I would imagine there's certainly a chance she'll stay. It depends what sort of mindset she's in, because in Chicago, it's her team at this point. You know, now that Vandersloot's gone, Parker's gone, everyone else, you know, she is the star. Is that what she wants to be? Because, I mean, people have talked about that with Jewel Lloyd for a while as well. You know, does she want her own team? Because that's what Copper is. She is the one they'll be building around if she stays in Chicago. But, you know, do you want to try and win? Because if you want to try and beat the likes of Las Vegas and New York, then you better get more help than she's got in Chicago right now. You're not going to win a title unless you get really lucky when your starting lineup is people like Marina Mabrey and Elizabeth Williams, who are good players, but not the superstars that they've got on those super teams.
That is very true. We'll jump here to the next topic, which is All Star. It's coming up here really soon. Really excited about that. But from that standpoint, you had a couple of disagreements. You recorded a great episode with Tevin Pelton on her Hoop Stats podcast. I just had my episode with Nick Andre here on a Pro Basketball Show. So go listen to those. Go check those out. But in terms of your All-Stars, you had one that you felt really strongly about. And I think you made a very great point. But just because of the injury, I think a lot of people, myself included, kind of ruled her out. You made it a point. Sell me on Bree Jones.
I mean, you could tell on the podcast when I was recording with Kevin as well, we pretty much glossed over her because we both just felt it was that obvious that she should have been voted in as a reserve because she had missed a maximum of 3 games when the coaches were voting on the reserves, played in 13. And the numbers speak for themselves. She's shooting 57%. She's the second best player on either the second or the third best team in the league, depending on your perspective on Connecticut versus New York. Yeah, I didn't think there was much of a debate about it, basically. And I think I hope the coaches overlooked her because she was injured, because if they overlooked her just because they didn't think she should have got in, then that's even more ridiculous. But yeah, I assume they left her out because they thought, well, she's hurt, she's not going to play anyway, so why would we bother voting for her? But All-Star recognition counts. You know, when people look back at a career, they sort of say X time All-Star, and it's money as well. You get prize money for these things, so they're taking it out of Bree Jones's pocket. Yeah, I thought it was pretty obvious that she should have been in. The other differences I had from the official teams, I'm happy to argue about and debate. Players who are all on a very similar tier. That one I thought was really obvious, and they screwed it up.
And kind of, I guess for me, staying on the same team, actually, I thought Alyssa Thomas was a clear-cut starter out of this group.
I think pretty much everyone said that when they named it. Yeah. I forget which group it was that messed that up. Maybe it was the fans, but yeah, she should have been starting. But ultimately, as long as you're going, I don't think it's a big deal whether you're starting or not, really. But yeah,
that's a good point. I'll take that on Bree Jones. The couple of others that you had Natasha Cloud, who I'm a big Natasha Cloud fan, as well as Jordan Canada. So why them over? And you mentioned in your article Talia Topper and Kelsey Mitchell.
Well, Cloud's numbers have got even worse since we recorded that podcast, which doesn't help my argument. But yeah, we talked about it at the time that the Washington trio on the perimeter, Cloud, Sykes, and Atkins, have all been good. And you kind of, when you started looking at the teams, you sort of felt like their perimeter needed recognition one way or another, but you wanted like a third of each of them to go to the All-Star game somehow, which you can't do. So Kevin picked Sykes, I picked Cloud, and the coaches picked none of them. But, yeah, I can't. So yeah. No, Cloud. I went with Cloud because she's kind of the leader of the group. She leads the team, both sort of on the court and vocally. She obviously they're sort of their primary creator as the point guard. You can argue over which is the best defender. It's probably Sykes this season, but they're all good.
Yeah.
So yeah, and Jordan Canada's had a great year and finally is hitting some shots, which opens things up for the rest of her game. LA are better than people expected. I think it would be fair to say that they've been decent despite a lot of ins and outs on the court. Too many people getting injured, different players getting injured at different times, and apart from Nneka, she's been their one constant, and yeah, has led the team, creates, and has actually hit some threes this year at pretty much league average, which is the first time in her entire career she's done that. One of the better perimeter defenders in the league as well. Yeah, I just thought she deserved it. I don't think Kalia Copper's had that great of a year yet. I think that's partly she's got in on reputation. And I think Kelsey Mitchell's got in mostly because people keep saying, how has she never been an all-star? And then they finally decided, oh, we better put her in this year because otherwise people will start whining about it again. So, not that she's been bad, just that I wouldn't have had her in the top 12. It's another year where I think she would have been just outside of the group, basically. She's always been a near all-star, just consistently a near all-star for a lot of years.
And you have players like that who go through their careers. I think, for me, Kelsey Mitchell still putting up some of those stats. And like I said, based here in Indiana, I've gotten to see what she can do the last couple of seasons since I've really tuned into the W. But I think Indiana maybe was just doing well enough by the point of reserves being announced that they could get their spot. Lastly here, Richard, before I ditch you out of here, Gabby Williams you touched on. And she is returning to the W. I think fans, like you mentioned in your article, like the WNBA fans should be happy about that move. But why were you at least a little bit opposed to the move when it first happened?
I mean, the only real reservations I've got is that Seattle shouldn't really be trying to win at this point. This goes back to what we talked about with US sports versus the rest of the world. You guys have a draft. You reward teams for being bad. And especially this year, we could have Caitlin Clark. We could have, I always forget her name, the center at Stanford, Brink.
Yes.
In the lottery, there could be some really big rewards for missing the playoffs and being one of the 4 worst teams in the league. So if Gabby Williams helps you get better, that's not necessarily a good thing. But I can't blame Seattle for trying to be competent because they've been really poor at times this season, and she should help. And they've got youngsters. They've still got plenty of minutes to give to their young players, so she shouldn't be taking too much away from too many young players.
Yeah, happy to see Gabby Williams back, like you said. It will make them a little bit better, which I think is an interesting topic to touch on Seattle and Indiana both. But we're going to wrap this up. Richard Cohen, everyone, thank you so much for joining a Pro Basketball Show. Had a lot of fun talking with you, and thank you for all the great work that you do covering the W.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, make sure to follow and subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Make sure to follow on Twitter and Instagram at APBShow and follow me at the AC Willett 22. Thank you so much for tuning in for a Pro Basketball Show. I am Andrew Willett.